Hello, hello. Welcome to another episode of the In Between podcast. I'm your host, Elizabeth Cheney, and I am so excited. I mean, when am I not excited? But I am so excited for my guest today. I teased Maddie a few months ago. I was talking about pivoting in your career, specifically any of my followers wanting to get out of teaching to focus into corporate or tech, all the things, but honestly, just pivoting in your career in general, because that's a giant in between. Well, guess what, folks? She's here in the flesh on the pod. So without further ado, please welcome Maddie Neuman to the In Between podcast. Hi,
Yay!
Maddie.
I'm imagining like people clapping at home.
Yes, yes. Do, do,
Or
do,
they're
do.
like, who is that? I'll decide if I'll clap later. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. I know we've been talking about this for a while, so just really excited to talk about this topic and talk to you, and hopefully your listeners get something great out of it.
If not, they had a cool conversation with two
Yes.
chicks. So
Yeah,
there we go.
exactly.
Well,
Exactly.
before I even let you get into the spiel, I just have to start off by saying, everyone listening, me and Maddie have a kind of cool connection. So we are related, but not related. So related by marriage. And it's so funny. So Maddie lives in Washington State on the West Coast. I'm in Georgia, East Coast. Couldn't be farther away from each other.
Huh?
Maddie's aunt is my two cousins. And I think I've mentioned Evan and Emily on the pod before. They're like my siblings, but Maddie and I are Evan and Emily's each first cousin, but opposite sides of the family. So
Yep.
I always joke like we're like family who have never met, but yet we're weirdly similar because like we are both into theater and public speaking and just being badass and helping everyone along the way. And so it's just so exciting to finally get together because I don't know, it's like my whole life I've been teasing like how cool Liz and Maddie are, and now boom, we're together.
Yeah, here
So
we are. Yes, finally. I know. It only took, I won't say how many years,
a
but it took
couple of decades.
couple decades, but here we are, and I'm stoked to be here. Stoked that we finally are connected, and I'm really excited for the conversation.
Awesome. So, Maddie has 10 plus years of progressive organizational development. So, that's organization wide learning, development, organizational change management, leadership, diversity, and inclusion. Basically, she is going in helping make sure companies have the right systems in place. They're taking care of their employees. So, Maddie is here to make sure that everyone knows what they're supposed to be doing, communicating all of that, taking what the high levels want and tracking it down to the bottom all over on a organization-wide playing field. So she is a very important person with a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge. So that's why I brought her on today to talk about pivoting in your career. And Maddie was previously a teacher, so we were going to get into that because I obviously have a lot of listeners and I know it's a hot topic, people trying to get out of teaching and transitioning into corporate America, tech. I know the tech environment's not ideal right now, but really Maddie is here to share her experience and her badassness and to help some of y'all navigating that major in between of, oh my gosh, I'm not happy what I'm doing, but this is all I know. What do we do? So without further ado, Maddie, introduce yourself on the in between, please.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. You've set the bar very high for me with the intro, and you explained what I do probably better than I do. So maybe I'll just have to like take that clip and people say, "What do you do?" And I'll just press play. Yeah, so I'm Maddie. I live in Washington State. I'm originally from the East Coast, so I grew up in Washington D.C. area and Virginia, and I moved out here with my family when I was like 12 or 13 and just never left. So now I guess I'm a West Coaster, right? Like been out here longer than the East Coast.
I would say
Um,
so.
but yeah, I think so. Let's see here. I'm married. My wife and I have two dogs, and honestly, we've gotten pretty boring. I've realized, like, through the pandemic, like, I don't know. I used to have a lot more to my intro. I do improv. That's kind of like my main hobby outside of work. So not stand up, like you go in with your jokes and you've got a microphone or whatever. I don't think I'm like funny in that way, but I do love doing improv, which is basically just like a play that you make up on the spot
Mm.
with other folks who have agreed to do the same. So I've been doing that for, gosh, like 12, 15 years. I've
Oh,
lost
wow.
count. Yeah. So that's kind of my main thing. I haven't been doing it as much recently. I think the pandemic and live theater, they didn't really go well together. People are starting to get back into it, starting to go back to live events. So hoping to get back into that more. I work remotely full time. I lead a team of change and learning professionals for a big tech company. It's awesome. Yeah, I love what I do. The people on my team are amazing. They are the superheroes, and I help them navigate their day to day, help remove blockers, and mostly just get out of their way so that they can shine. But like you mentioned, I did start my career in education. So I taught high school for a little while, and then I taught middle school for a little while.
Ooh.
So yeah, the times in your life where, I mean, honestly, everything's hard, right? Cycle. But yeah, middle and high school, those are those times when it's like you're figuring out who you are and where
Oh.
you're going and all the things. Plus,
Having flashbacks, maybe minor triggers of just
yeah, right.
being bullied.
I know. When I say like middle school and high school, people kind of have that reaction where they're like, oh, whew, yeah, I remember that.
Especially middle school. I mean, I think you have to be a special kind of person to even tackle teaching middle school because that is just hormonal rage in all the ways.
Yeah,
Just,
yeah, agreed.
mm.
Yeah, I hated middle school first one, and being back was a little bit triggering on the other side, sort of like watch it all play out again. But yeah, I think I was a teacher total like 7 years if you include the student teaching and
Right.
all of that as well. But yeah, I've made the transition a couple of years ago into corporate America, into tech, and now I find myself in the change management and learning and development spaces. But let's see, outside of all of those things, I enjoy the outdoors, nature. Like yesterday just was 60 degrees here
Ooh.
in Washington. And it doesn't really like get nice here until like June-ish. So it's kind of a nice
Ah.
little preview of like, ooh, sunshine. And so love getting outside and just being in nature, hiking, all that. So but yeah,
Yeah.
that's me in a
I was
nutshell.
going to say outdoors, I can't imagine how nice it must be to be in the Pacific Northwest with the forest and the weather and the air and just the views. I would probably be more of an outdoor junkie if I lived out there. I mean, I'm an outdoor junkie now, but I don't know,
Yeah,
getting
yeah.
around Atlanta sucks. So I can't
Yes.
imagine how nice it is out there.
Come June through October, and the
Okay.
rest of the year just
Stinks. Is
maybe you're not.
Washington State as wet and rainy as the stereotype is? Or would you say there's some sunshine, or is it it's mostly cloudy and rainy?
Yeah, I mean, it's not as rainy. Like it rains a lot, like for sure. But I think most people think, oh, Washington State or Pacific Northwest, it's raining all the time.
Right.
No, it's just gray a lot of the time. And I honestly feel like that is maybe worse because it's like it just looks depressing, but like nothing's happening, Again, it's like May or June, things start to kind of turn around, and then you get this amazing sort of summer and fall, and then you sort of forget how bad it was. So
Ah.
every year it happens. Like right now, I'm in this spot of like, okay, I feel like spring's coming, and I'm starting to forget how bad the last few months were, and then I will forget, and then I'll love it, and then I will be upset again for another few months. So you just kind of go through the cycle.
And you're used to being duped. I feel like that's how Georgia is. Cause like I felt like we've had more of a winter the past couple of years, but the summers are just so miserable because I hate the
Oh yeah,
humidity. I can't
yeah.
handle the humidity. And then I'm like, oh, well, that was a good winter. We kind of had some cold. Wow, I actually wore my jacket for a few days in December. And then May hits and I'm just gonna be a melted mess of humidity and anger.
Yes.
Let's be
Well,
real.
come
Anger.
on, come on out in that time when you're losing it. Yeah,
Absolutely. Will
coming out over
do.
here. Yeah.
I love it. All right. Thank you for that intro. Great spiel. So you started off teaching. I'm just going to ask this. Originally, when you were graduating high school, going into college, you wanted to be a teacher, right? I just want to know, was teaching always the desire? Because I know for me, like when I went to college, I had no idea what I wanted to do.
Same. Honestly, I don't think any of us know what we want to do. Maybe some people do, in which case I'd love to know their secret. I mean, I have always, even as a little kid, loved the idea of being a teacher. I used to play teacher, pretend when I was a kid. And that's always been sort of in my head. I've always loved my teachers. I've loved school. I've loved the whole thing. To be honest with you, when I was in high school, thinking about college, I really wasn't thinking about what I wanted to do for a career. I was unfortunately thinking about the weather. I was like, where can I go to college where it's going to be nice? And those were my priorities, which is honestly like, come on, Maddie, get into it. So, but I didn't go anywhere nice. I stayed here in Washington and ended up making a more financially sound choice. But yeah, I remember talking to my freshman year advisor and they were asking like, hey, okay, like if you could do anything, what would you do? And my answer was quite honestly, I would love to have Ellen DeGeneres' job. Like truly, I would love to like have a talk show. I would love
Oh
to
my
interview
gosh,
people. I
Maddie,
would love,
we are so similar. This is
yeah,
so crazy. I feel like just
yeah,
everyone listening, there might be a few of those moments where I'm like, Maddie, we are literally the parallel version of each other.
yes. You need a
I
button
love
or
it.
something that you can push when that
I do.
happens. Just like get
We're
a little
related, but
sound effect.
not. That's what we need.
Yes. Yes. Totally. Totally. Yeah. So my advisor heard that and was like, okay, so communications, right? Like what I'm hearing you say is communications. And I said, no, I very genuinely think I would love my own talk show. Anyhow, walked out with communications written as the tentative major. Throughout the year, I took some different courses, and there was kind of like an intro to teaching. You took it if you're interested in teaching, but you weren't quite ready to commit. And I took that class with a friend. And by that point, I guess I had evolved enough in my thinking to realize like, okay, I can't major in Ellen DeGeneres, which is unfortunate. It would be great if I could, but maybe I should entertain this idea of teaching. Again, I've always like had that thought, that seed. So when it came time to officially declare, I became a secondary education, so like middle and high school focused major. Technically, it was English literature for secondary education. So translation, being an English teacher in middle or high school. And then I kept that communications minor. So I did my 4 years, graduated with the English Lit secondary ed degree with the comm minor, and ended up going back for what's called a post-baccalaureate.
What is that?
It's like a year and a half-ish, 18 months-ish of taking some additional education courses. It's not quite a master's degree, but it sets you up on the path if you were interested in
Got it.
pursuing teaching, but it allows you to be able to get your teaching certificate, essentially.
Got
Right. So it was more intensive teaching focused courses. So I would spend time shadowing a teacher, or part-time me teaching, part-time them teaching. And then all of that led into student teaching, which was like, hey, okay, you're officially
wow.
a teacher. We've like recognized you have a teaching certificate, right? Like you're authorized to do this, but you still need supervision
Wow.
for 6 months.
So you had 4 years of a college degree, then you had an additional 18 months of additional learning certification type of thing. And then you had an additional 6 months after that of student teaching before you could even be in the classroom by yourself. So
Correct.
committing a lot of time to this. Okay, got it.
Yeah. 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 And it honestly, it's a good thing. I mean, there's people
Right.
who they find out in that period of time, like, oop, this isn't for me. And that's good. But also just to make sure that, like, again, I know different professions, right? Like doctors, for example, you have to study for what feels like 20 years in order to get going. And thank goodness, because I would, hate to have a doctor who was like, I've got 4 years of training. Let me open you up.
I watched a YouTube video on brain surgery.
Yeah,
Let's get it going.
Totally. Let's do it. Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's good in that way, but it definitely was a journey. And there was definitely points like, oh man, I don't know if I'm ever going to get through this. Like, am I ever going to just make it to the other side? All I want to do is just be a teacher and like have a job, which is then its own thing. Because, right, you finish your student teaching and then you have to find a job. You have to find places that are hiring and all of that. So yes, that was the path. So that's why earlier when I was like, I think it was 6 or 7 years total, it was after that practicum student teaching point. After that, it was a few years.
Jeez. So I'm just curious, were you working while you were doing this? Like, were you getting paid, or were you literally just being a student teacher essentially after you graduated?
Yeah. So I wasn't paid for student teaching or anything before that. So I had lots of fun, odd jobs. I think at one point I had like 5 or 6 jobs at the same time. My taxes that year were like really fun. Like,
bless your heart.
I was just honestly just trying to like make it work.
Right.
Yeah. But what you could do when you were student teaching is you could, after a certain point, be a sub. And so I was able to kind of get a little bit that way. But yeah, no, it was after the student teaching, then it was like, okay, now I can apply for these jobs and have a teacher salary and get a paycheck for doing this thing that I've been doing. Yeah. So that's also another hard part of it, is like, how are you going to support yourself while you're still figuring all this out? It's hard.
And to your point, I understand it, and it makes sense. You want like all the education, because you don't just want random person coming in. I think I'm pretty awesome, but I don't need to teach kids because I'm not going to have that psychology aspect behind it and different learning styles. So not even in addition to all the learning that goes into it, there's also like politics, and it's just a lot to think about. Like, you are managing a classroom with who knows how many individual personalities and learning. And it's a lot. So at this point, even with all the education and you're rocking and rolling, you're still feeling that inspiration, that drive to, okay, we're going to teach. So once you're finally through the education and you've gotten the job teaching, so how was the transition from learning to be a teacher into teaching? Was it boom, smooth sailing, or oh wow, this is a lot? And let's
Mhm.
talk about, when did we start thinking, I don't know if this is working out for me, and the emotions and feelings behind that. So take it away.
Yeah, totally. No, I mean, I think it was not an easy transition. It wasn't like, oh, and I have my classroom and here's the key and it's just everything's smooth. No, I mean, that transition right there is really hard because even though, you've just shadowed a teacher for 6 months or whatever, and you've been around all of this for years, once you get handed the key and you're like, okay, good luck, sort of like,
Oh,
uh-oh, do I know what I'm doing? So no, and I mean, I didn't really know fully what I was doing. I think a lot of teachers are in that realm. The first few years you're like, well, let me just sort of make this up as I go and figure it out and learn along the way. And so that's what I did. I mean, I just sort of leaned on a lot of the other teachers at my school and thankfully had some really great colleagues and partners there. People who've been there for like 20, 30 years who are like,
yeah.
oh, you're fine. Let me help you, But a lot of it was just honestly like stepping out on a tightrope and just realizing I've got to keep putting one foot in front of the other. And if I fall, it will be maybe horrible or embarrassing, or like I've got like all of these student lives that are like sort of counting on me to know what I'm doing. And I did, again, I was properly trained, but also it's like I had no experience. And so I
Right.
think, you can go to all the classes and have all the degrees and like read all the books, but it's not until you actually like start doing the thing that I feel like you're really learning like, oh, well, that didn't work at all. Why didn't
Right.
that work? Let me understand that more. Or wow, that worked really well. How do I do more of that? So yeah, the first year was just tons of trial and error, really hard, constantly feeling like I don't know what I'm doing. I shouldn't be here. You have parents who are calling in, kind of telling you the same thing. You shouldn't be here. I disagree with your choices. I don't want my student reading that book. Why doesn't my student have an A? Your student never shows up. No, I think the big piece of this is you can, have all of your degrees and you can read all the books and, do all the things, but it's not really until you're actually doing it. It's not until you're actually teaching that you really realize like, oh, here's what's working and here's what's not working. And let me learn by doing. Like that's the piece I think where it really starts to click. But yeah, I mean, those first few years, you wonder, or at least I wondered, should I be here? Like, am I good enough? Should I be doing this? I mean, you really,
That's
for me,
deep. That's
yeah,
intense.
it was a big question mark around whether I was good enough at this, whether I could handle it. I mean, there's a lot of pressure, obviously, to get it right. These are people's lives. These are young students who, they are trying to go places, they need to learn. And so the stakes feel really high. But then you also have parents who are questioning your choices and questioning your decisions on what you're teaching and how you're teaching. And they believe their kids should be getting an A, even if they never do any of their homework or they fail all their tests, right? So you have all of these outside voices that are sort of questioning you, which only sort of amplify the inside voice, at least for me, that was
Right.
questioning myself too. And I'm like, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't be here. But I would say at the same time, right, I also had a lot of support and I had other teachers that were like, you're doing great. And my students, again, not everyone, but a lot of them were saying, this is awesome, or I loved that lesson, or I've never enjoyed reading before. And like, now I do, and there were certainly some students who had other comments and feedback that weren't as
Of course.
positive. I think it's a super vulnerable time where you're not sure if you're doing the right things.
I
Yeah.
was gonna say that's a lot of influence. Not so you have your internal influence, you have external outside influence, and every situation is different. Like it's like literally a case by case basis. So it's like juggling, let's just say average 30 students. So 30 different personalities, 30 different learning abilities and disadvantages. And then additionally, I mean, you've definitely talked highly about the internal support that you had, but I do know with teaching, and maybe especially more so now after the pandemic, there's a lot of politics involved too. So that's just like a lot of forces, not even just like the one internally where you're like, am I doing okay? Like, is this kid
Yeah.
going to go be successful, or are they going to just end up, homeless or something? Right.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of pressure. Okay. And that was
Yeah.
all within the first year of teaching. Like that's just, whew.
Yeah.
I mean,
No,
starting a new job is one thing, but that is just, the stakes are already above your head starting a new job.
yeah, it is no joke. I mean, I haven't done all the careers, but I would say of what I've heard and then what I've experienced post teaching, nothing is harder, in my opinion, than this. And I think for people who are parents or who are volunteers in schools, you sort of see one side of it, but to be in that teacher's shoes and really to be experiencing all of this is a lot. There's also this whole element of you are sort of responsible not only for the students learning but their well-being as a person, right? Because a lot of
Right.
students come to you and they do not have solid home lives. School is the one safe, predictable space for them all day, and like that's a lot to put on you as a teacher to go like, oh wow, I am their one solid adult influence,
Mm.
and when they leave here they're not going into a good situation, and carrying that home every night is super heavy on top of all the rest of it, right?
I
And
can't
like
imagine.
lesson plans and needing to make sure you're prepared and dealing with teacher emails and student emails. And it's honestly feels like it's like 10 jobs in one. And I think as we think about burnout and why are teachers leaving and why do people say I need to leave this profession, it's that, right?
Mhm.
It's too many jobs rolled into one job with so much pressure and very little support as far as pay and benefits and societal respect,
Amen.
like, and that weighs on you, right? And
Yep.
some people can push through that for their whole career, and doesn't mean it doesn't impact them or affect them, but they just can continue to move through that system. And for a lot of other teachers, they're like, I can't do this. And what's underneath that I can't do this is different for everyone, but
Right.
it's a lot and it's heavy. And societally, I think we're really failing our teachers,
I agree.
and how we're, not giving them the support that they need. And yet they're expected to do so much, right?
Exactly.
So,
And that's really
yeah.
where the inspiration from this episode came from. And I know we're talking about pivoting your career and we're also focusing on teaching and getting out. But to every point you just said, that was the main reason why I wanted to have this episode, because I know, one, I have a lot of listeners who are teaching or they're dating or with people who are teachers looking to get out of it for every reason you just said. I would love your opinion on this as well. But you get into that career, you get into the teaching path to change lives. Because like you said, you are responsible for tens and tens, and it could be hundreds when you think about the duration of a long career of individual futures. I know that sounds intense and dramatic, but correct me if I'm wrong. That is what it's like.
Oh
And
yeah.
just given the political climate and all the things you just said, the parents coming at you, it's this, you're being a parent to some of these kids, you're being a therapist to some of these kids. And like you said, it is 10 things, 10 jobs rolled into one without proper respect, without proper pay, without proper work-life balance. And that's ultimately what it comes down to. So
Yeah.
you don't mind sharing how many years after the years of training, how long were you
Mhm.
teaching until you transitioned out? And then let's talk about the build up into what were, and whether it was a bunch of individual things or was it the overarching, hey, originally my goal and my dream was to be a talk show host, and that voice became louder than what you currently were in. Let's talk about what got Maddie to start considering transitioning out of teaching, what pushed you, and then let's talk about all of the emotions, imposter syndrome, the highs, the lows that came with that.
Yeah, so I think I always kind of held these two voices in my head, even when I was starting to get into the student teaching that we talked about. And then through my handful of years teaching high school and middle school, I always had this one voice that was really solidly saying, this is such impactful work. This is so inspirational. These students are amazing. I feel energized and motivated to be here. I really and truly did feel that the whole time. Like that was always there. At the same time, there was always this other voice, and it started quieter and then it got louder as the years went on. But the other voice was always like, is this right for me? It wasn't, do I want this? Because I always wanted it. Right.
Right.
And even still, I've been out of the classroom for, gosh, maybe 6 years now, 7 years. Feels like it hasn't been that long, but I still really regret, or not regret, but I miss the classroom. Like I miss being a teacher. I miss working with other teachers. I miss working with students. I miss feeling like every single day what I'm doing is changing lives and making a difference. I miss that. And I loved
Mm,
that. And this is probably the question I get asked the most, right? Which is, well, why'd you leave? If you loved it so much, why'd you leave?
right.
And it's taken years of therapy and years of introspection and really hard conversation. And honestly, it's still hard for me to think about. But I left because I knew I was not a great teacher in towards the end there. I was really starting to get impacted by all of that stuff we just talked about, all of those pressures,
All the politics, all that.
the politics, the constant overwhelm, the lack of support. At one point I had 35 plus students,
That's a
many of
lot.
them who all had, yeah, I mean, just like growing class sizes, growing responsibilities. And I really needed help. My last year teaching, I sort of raised my hand and said, I don't know if I can do this. I need some extra bodies in this classroom. Like there's so many students who have such diverse needs. And I know I'm not meeting all of them, right? Like I'm teaching one lesson plan and I'm trying to differentiate for as many of these students in here, but I can't teach 30 different ways at one time, but I can try and like make one lesson work for all of these students as best I can. But at the end of the day, I left every day sort of feeling like, wow, here's all the ways I feel like I sort of let some of my students down today. And, that just compounds all of those feelings of like, I don't have time to recover. That's the other piece. I would come home after school and then I had to do all of the post work, which is like I need to be grading and reading essays and inputting grades, inputting feedback, responding to parent questions, responding to student questions. And so it's like you have your day job and then you have your night job. So you can't really like recover. And then on the weekend, sort of same deal, right? Like you're planning and preparing for the next week, the next day, whatever it is. So it sort of never ends.
Right. It's a career that you can't leave at home. That's what it sounds like. Like you
No,
can't
it's a career
leave,
you
or not
do
leave it at
leave
home.
at
You
home.
can't leave it at work. Like it always is going to
Yeah.
come with you.
Yes. It's all day. And I just truly, after 2 years or so of feeling that way and feeling like I'm so beat down by this, that when I show up in the classroom, like I just knew it. I knew that I'm not feeling this. My students are seeing that I'm not feeling this. They are seeing that I am feeling burnt out, tired, worried. And again, I could see them see me. And that was sort of when I had that light bulb where I'm like, they are experiencing a teacher who should probably not be here. Right. And that was horrifying. Right. It was sort of that moment where it was like, I can know this, but the minute that I see them noticing this is unfair. Right. They deserve a teacher who, when they look at her or when they look at him, they see someone who not only wants to be there, because again, I always wanted to be there, but that could be there, that mentally could be handling this. Right. Hindsight, what I ended up doing was I left in the middle of the year, right at the semester break, which was terrible. I think if there was like one regret that I have, it would be when I left and how I left. Because it was sort of one of those things where it got to a point where I was like, I gotta go. This isn't fair for anyone. I'm not a good teacher. I remember specifically vividly moments where I would have to run out of my classroom in between class periods and go and cry in the teacher's lounge or like cry in the bathroom because it was just weighing so heavily.
It's almost like you're losing your sense of self in a way. Not saying that you didn't know who you were, but it's not that you didn't want to be a teacher. But when everything starts to compound and you start losing who you are, it's like, oh my gosh, like I have been so out of touch with my needs. And then boom, that all hits at once.
And I'm not a good teacher. Like at the same time, it's like, I knew that. I was like, I'm not doing a good job. I'm not feeling great and I'm not doing great. So that's just bad all around. Yeah. So we can dig into this more. I think maybe your listeners will be interested in like, oh, you left and you did another job.
Yeah.
Like how'd that happen?
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about that because that is a sudden change in the mid semester. So I totally get that.
Mid semester. Yeah. No, when I look back, that was honestly a really dark part of my life. It was a loss. It felt like immense grief. That took years to process. And I still, when I think about it, my heart sinks because it was kind of one of those fight or flight things where I was like, I got to go. And I found an opportunity. There was a company about an hour and a half from where I lived. So I live about an hour and a half north of Seattle. So if folks who are aware of Seattle, they know that's kind of the big city. And so this job was in Seattle. And so it required me to not only leave my profession, but also to leave my home and to move an hour and a half away. But at that point, I was feeling like I was just grasping at anything. And it was a learning and training coordinator job for a mechanical contractor company. And they'd never had like a formal learning or training program. And so they had the idea of what this could look like, but they were looking for someone who could kind of execute and put it into practice. And for whatever reason, they took a chance on me. Like I really, like if I were them, I don't know if I would have hired me. Like I think they must have seen something that went beyond the resume. They saw something that went beyond the experiences I had. And I think they saw potential. And that's what they hired, was potential instead of hiring experience necessarily.
Can I ask you a quick question? Did they find you? Did you find this job? What were you searching when you were trying to transition out of teaching? I know we're going to get into this, like transferable skills and other industries, departments, things like that for our fellow teachers who are looking to get out. But I'm just curious, when you were like, all right, fight or flight, I'm going to quit. And I do want to also say this. I know personally a few people who have done that too. So I know you're not the only one who had to literally pull the string. You know what I mean? Just get out. Yeah. That's not to shortchange or gaslight or anything like that. The emotions that you went through, because I can only imagine my heart does break. Like I literally got goosebumps because I could feel that. I sense that because you're a good person. And again, it goes back to being responsible for all these individuals' futures and feeling that guilt and that weight. But ultimately, like, that shouldn't be there. You know what I mean? But like, I get why it's there. Does that make sense? But to talk about, okay, so you fight or flight, we're getting out. What did you look in? What were you searching? Or was it just kind of, it fell into your lap? And that's okay too. Cause I believe like when you are doing things for you, and that's what this was, like Maddie said, Maddie needs to get out of teaching, and Maddie's looking, I don't know where Maddie's going to go, but Maddie's going to find what she's looking for. I do believe things happen if you put one foot in front of each other. So could you go a little bit into like, how did you find this role? Even if it was like 2 weeks and boom, it landed in your lap, doesn't matter. I don't care how the story was, but just a little bit into how did you start? Literally.
Yeah. So I found them. This did not find me. I got to that point where I had that light bulb moment. I'm seeing my students just not have the teacher that they deserve to have. And that was really where I felt like this is not fair to them and also not fair to me. And so I started just casually, honestly, on Indeed. I wasn't looking on LinkedIn at that point. I don't think LinkedIn was kind of where it was now. Yeah, I think I just typed in education jobs or training. I knew, I was like, what do I have, right? I have a background in education. I have a background in teaching. I knew I didn't want to probably find another teaching job, right? Like, or a traditional classroom job, but I was curious what else was out there that could be in like the world of education, because education is more than just the classroom, teaching, right? There's all sorts of different elements to this sector of education. And so I started just casually looking and randomly applying to random jobs. I think there was like a couple nonprofit education jobs I applied to. There was some education publishing companies that like made textbooks and stuff. I think I applied to some of those.
Yeah.
Anything that basically had like education or training or learning in the job title or description. I was like, yep, okay, I'm going to apply. And I just applied whether I was qualified or not. I was really like, I need to find something else. And I knew I would teach until something else came my way. I did not know that this opportunity would sort of materialize the way that it did. Again, I was just sort of throwing applications into the wind. But after a few months, I did get an interview with this company. And again, up until that point, I didn't even get a response. Like, I don't even know if I got the email that was like, we've received your resume. Like, I don't even know if I got that. There's nothing, like just throwing into nothingness. So when I got this response, I was like, oh my gosh, like they got it, right?
You know who I am. Okay.
Yeah, got it. And they want to interview me. Oh my gosh. And by this point, certainly I'd done tons of interviews, but not for any job other than being a waitress or working at retail jobs or teaching interviews, which teaching interviews are very different than traditional interviews. They sometimes involve students. I remember I had one teaching interview that had like 11 people around a table. There was parents and a principal and teachers and students. And I was like,
that's intense.
It was intense. Yeah.
Jeez.
So yeah, I had the interview and I remember just feeling like the entire drive down, just like, this is impossible. I am an imposter. I have no idea what I'm doing. There's no way they're going to hire me. That was the voice that was in my head the entire time. Also, as they're pummeling questions at me around like, how would you handle this situation? Or tell me about a time when you've done this, or all these things that I probably should have had great answers to. I had an answer, whether it was great or not, I don't know. But in my head, the voice track was like, what are you doing? You're totally making a mistake. You have no idea what you know what I mean? It was just this voice that was basically saying, you shouldn't be here. You don't know enough. You don't have enough experience. They're going to choose someone else, which is a pretty horrible
Yeah.
way to go through an interview. But I think
1000%.
a lot of us feel that way, right? Like I think a lot of us
Right.
have that voice. And so
Right. I know I do.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's real. And I went through the interview. I think they called me back for a second interview just to kind of further push on a few things. It was actually a really intense experience. If I think back to like interviews I've had prior, this was maybe the harder one. But I will never forget, it was after school and there were still some students in the hallway, but I remember I saw a Seattle number on my phone calling me. And so I answered it, and it was the hiring manager for that job. And he basically was like, I'm really excited. I'd love to offer you the position. It's one of those moments where, like, if it's a movie, there's like intense music playing, but like picture me standing sort of at the end of the hallway. Their students are like running out to the bus, and I have the phone. And like, why I answered in that moment, I'm actually thinking, like, why didn't I just like step into my classroom? I don't know, but I'm in the hallway with the phone. He's saying, we want to offer you the job. And I'm sort of like literally looking at two different parts of my life. I'm watching the current state part of my life, which is these kids in this classroom that I built, and the buses and the energy and the emotion. And then I'm holding my phone and I'm hearing what could be my future.
Right.
You
Oh, I'm
know?
getting goosebumps.
And
Yeah.
no, I it's just like, oh my gosh, I'll never forget that moment. And so I don't remember if I accepted it right away. I think I did. I think I was like in shock, and I was like, great, yep, cool, I'll take it. I probably should have like taken a beat and been like, thank you, let me think about this and get back to you. No, I think I was just like, yep, let's do it. I'll be there. Then I had this realization where I was like, oh crap,
It's happening.
I just accepted a job, and I'm also still a teacher. So, yeah, it was a moment.
It all probably hit you like, oh my
Yeah,
goodness. And on top of all of the conflicting, extreme, intense emotions you've been feeling up until this point of just
yeah,
imposter syndrome in teaching, imposter syndrome in interviewing, just all of
yeah.
it. Feel like an imposter everywhere. And now it's actually happening for you. That is a lot. As exciting as it is, I totally get that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, so and luckily, I mean, again, I didn't time this or like plan this way, but luckily it was a few weeks before that semester break. And as luck, the universe, whatever you want to believe would have it, my biggest fear was like, okay, I don't want to leave my students high and dry. Right. Like I
Mhm.
know that the district I was in was super competitive. Everyone wanted to teach there. There would be no shortage of people wanting to be in my spot. And that was another thing where I always held that. I always knew I am standing here in a position that so many people want.
Mhm.
And if I'm not fully here, I need to give this opportunity to someone else. But I also didn't want that to just be someone random, right? Obviously, I cared about my students. I invested in them for a whole half the year at this point, and I knew that this was going to be really hard. And so there was someone who she'd been trying to get a job in the district for a while. She'd been a substitute for a while. She was awesome, and she had substituted for me a couple times. And I just had this feeling where I was like, she's got to take this job. And I didn't even know at that point if she was looking for a full-time job. I was just like, it's got to be her.
Right.
And so I remember pulling her aside sort of shortly after all this happened. And I just said, look, like, here's the deal. I'm leaving. I want to make sure that whoever steps into this role is amazing. My students deserve that. And I also want to make sure I have time to transition them, transition you, transition myself. Like I want to do this the right way. And so again, the universe, whatever, she was the one. And she was like, oh my gosh, I've been looking for this and waiting for this moment. I was like, you can have everything in my classroom, keep it, take whatever you want. Like you can have all the books, keep everything the same. The kids deserve that. And she was just like, okay, let's do this. And like we went to the principal's office together, and I was like, look, I think I'd already talked to her, but I was like, I'm leaving. She's perfect. Let's make this happen. And we ended up kind of working out like a 3-week transition plan or
Oh,
something where
wow.
together, sort of, like we did things together. The kids sort of realized like, okay, it's going to be her, but here I am sort of transitioning this. So that I felt good about. Yeah. What a wild whirlwind. And then after all that, it's like, oh, better pack my life and like move an hour and a half
Right.
south and like leave everything and just sort of step into this
Whole
unknown.
new,
Like it
whole new
was
thing.
whole new thing. Yeah. There was no playbook. There wasn't like, oh, I've done this before. I've seen this before. It
Right.
was just completely uncharted territory. I think getting to the crux of your question, right, around what does that look like to make that pivot, right? You're
Right.
literally like, great, now I'm walking towards something I can't see. I mean, it's scary. That's
Right.
really scary. And I think
So
a lot of
terrifying.
people, they don't make switches, pivots. They don't do this because how scary that is. And I understand because I lived it and it was really hard. I wish I could say, and then I just waltzed into this new job and it was easy and
Right.
it was, just seamless and rainbows and butterflies and unicorns and good times. And it wasn't, it was great. I mean, the people there were lovely and the job was really challenging. And like, I learned a lot, but it was hard times. It was commuting. I was all of a sudden not a teacher and like this person in corporate America. I was trying to figure out, like, I remember I didn't know how to like set up a meeting with someone. Cause like in
Mm,
land, like you sort of had your own system that was a teacher system and you would
right.
do things that way. And I remember reaching out to this guy, another employee in the company, and I was like, oh yeah, like we need to meet about something. And he's like, great, put time on my calendar.
And
You
you're
should
like,
know this.
what is that?
Send a meeting invite. I'm like, oh, I thought we were just gonna like agree on a time and then sort of just meet up. But oh, okay, I have to like send an invite. Okay, got it. So things like that, right? Where I had to learn the corporate world. But through it all, I mean, I do think what stayed constant was I still had me. And I think that doesn't matter what my experience was up until that
Right.
point, whether I was a teacher, whether I had no experience, I had myself and I had my knowledge of I know how to work with people. I know how to talk to people. Like
Right.
I know how to care about things.
Hmm.
I know how to ask questions. It's like the basics. And that
Right.
was really what I had to lean on. I mean, obviously it helped that I was going into a education focused role with
Right.
education experience. Obviously that really helped, but a lot of it was just sort of just me trusting myself and trusting my instincts to go like, okay, I have no idea what I'm doing,
Hmm.
but I'm just going to try this or I'm going to
Right.
do that. And sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. And then I learned. Like either
Right.
way, whether it worked well, I was like, oh, cool, noted. Let's do that again. Or if it didn't work and it kind of just blew up in my face, it was like, oh, don't do that again. Just like either
You
way,
learn
I
from
was
the
like,
failure. You totally
yeah,
learn from the
yeah.
failure.
100%.
And I want to pause you on that comment. Like you always had you. You always could fall back on you. And I'm going to say this, and you can obviously agree or disagree, but I'm going to be a little bold and just say, despite how hard, and that's putting it lightly, the transition of accepting this is like teaching is not what I want to do. This is not the path I want. This is not working out the way I thought it would for all the reasons. And then also dealing with the guilt, the self-doubt, the imposter syndrome of getting out of it. All of that negativity aside, where you ended up and all the things you're saying, it started with you. It started with that voice inside your head. Even if it was negative, I know I struggle with imposter syndrome. I talk about this on the podcast all the time, but it did start with you. You said, this is not clicking as much as I would want it to. And dealing with the guilt, like with the kids and all of this, it was still ultimately you putting you first, even if it was to help them. So it's always coming back on you and fighting through
Yeah.
that imposter syndrome, even if you're scared shitless, even if you're like, what am I saying? They called me, they want to give me the job. What? But it's because you still betted on you. Even if you
Mhm.
had no idea how you were going to do it, you put one foot in front of the other. And so
Mhm.
I really appreciate you saying that because I think ultimately coming to any decision like this is checking in with yourself. And there's going to be waves of, okay, Maddie, you know what? Like you're fine. You're good at teaching. Just let it go. But then that thought comes up again. And then it starts, like we talked about, compound and this and this. And
Yeah.
although anyone and everyone's path getting out of teaching is going to be different in some regard, I truly believe putting one foot in front of the other, even if you're scared shitless, even if you have no idea what you're doing, just putting minimal effort towards whatever it is, it will work out for you, whether it's overnight, whether it's months, weeks, whatever. So always check in with yourself, even when it's negative. And of course, I'm sure like being on the other end of this now, you want to go back and probably put your arms around Maddie, even though there is that guilt there, but like ultimately how amazing it is to hear that even knowing all the guilt and self-doubt and things you've fought over or struggling with, you still did you still betted on you. So I just wanted to pause and preface that because for anyone listening who, even if you're just looking to pivot out of your job, looking for a new job, there is self-doubt and imposter syndrome anywhere. So I commend you for that because you're being very vulnerable and very open about those negative feelings and struggles. And I know you are not the only one. We all struggle with it. So I appreciate you saying that because ultimately I think it does. Hopefully this is not me gaslighting anybody, but it ultimately it is you. It comes back on you and you should always bet on you, even when you're like, oh my God, I don't know what the heck I'm doing. Cause like, so that's awesome. So you get into this world now and you're like, all right, I'm doing it. I'm going to figure it out. Sink or swim. Sink or swim is like the theme everywhere. I feel like it goes with imposter syndrome, I guess, but
Yeah.
it's
Yeah. And even if
crazy.
you start thinking, you can start swimming back. Like you're like, oh, I'm sinking. Oh, hold on. I can swim again. Yeah, sink and swim. That's been this theme of my life, I guess. I mean, I started sinking, I started swimming, I started figuring it out. And through that, really found sort of a passion for, again, it's like, yes, the job was totally different. Yes, the industry was totally different. But what was constant was like my drive and desire to help people change and to help people get better. That's been the thread through line no matter what I've done. And I think I'm on like my third or fourth job now since that first kind of corporate America job. But from day one in the classroom to where I am today, the thread of my why, or like what keeps me going, is that I just really care about helping other people get better. And the end of that sentence has looked different, like help people get better at learning how to do a thing, or help people get better at accepting change so that they can move forward, or helping people pivot. Again, it just helping people get better. Those are the key elements. And that's always been there. I mean, the momentum of all of it, it was in motion and it wasn't easy, but I learned a lot that first year and a bit in that job. And it was a struggle. It was a hard time. My wife at the time, she is Canadian. And I look back at this time in our lives and we kind of call it like that time. Like it was just sort of hard and dark because, oh, also, forgot about this. I left this part out. I must have blacked it out. That time when I was questioning whether or not I should be a teacher, before I started applying to other jobs, I went back online to do my master's. I want to figure out what the heck to do with my life. And so I applied to George Washington University. They have the fully online organizational leadership master's. And I was like, oh, this sounds like all the things I love, like people and education and change and training and learning. Like, this is what I'm interested in. So the last 6 months, 7 months of my teaching career, I was also doing my master's. And that was also what was helping me figure out, like, what do I want to do? So when I started this other job, I was still doing my master's. It was hard and a lot. And my wife, who I mentioned, she was Canadian. And so in order for her to come to America, she had to leave her job. But like as part of the immigration process, you can't start working here for, I think, at least a year. I can't remember exactly, but like you have to get your permanent resident certification and it's a whole process. So she was here but couldn't work. So then I had a new job and we were in a new city. We got a puppy and I'm doing my master's and we've got one income. It was really scary and really hard. You know, I honestly don't remember a lot of that year. It was really sad, but I just think like I was in survival mode, you know? So yeah, I don't want to like sugarcoat it. It was really, really, really hard. But once I kind of got through that period, I finished my master's, there was just sort of this talking a lot about the universe, you know, I don't know.
I believe in that kind of stuff. So
there was energy that was created, right? Whatever you want to call that. But there was energy that had been created through that pushing forward and just not giving up. And that energy created, I think, an optimism and just a confidence that I didn't have before. That was like, oh, okay, not only can I like do this, like I can do more than this. And so it was like just under 2 years in that first corporate America job, I was like, I want more. This is great. But, you know, I'd kind of reached the ceiling of where I could go in that job.
Right.
And I wanted more of it. Like I wanted to keep doing what I was doing in this realm of learning and development organizationally, but I want to do this on a bigger scale. What does that look like? I remember talking to a friend of mine and she was in consulting and she was talking about how she gets to work with tons of different companies. And again, you can be a consultant of anything. You can be in business development, you can be in strategy, you can be in learning and development, you could be in change, you could be analytics, whatever your jam is. You can do your jam as a consultant and work with a bunch of different companies and get a bunch of different experiences. And so I saw there was a consulting firm in Seattle. They weren't like the biggest, but they were looking for a learning and development person who also could do some change management. And I was like, I don't know what change management is. I think I did a course on that in my master's. I'd heard of it, but I was like, no, I'm going to try, and applied. And again, I still would say took a chance on me because I didn't have the typical background or resume of people who are becoming consultants. It was another one of those where I was like, nope, I'm going to leap. I'm going to try this and jump in. And I did. And had no idea what I was doing, honestly, for a lot of it, right? It was like, let me just keep figuring this out, which is kind of scary because it's like, as a consultant, I probably should have known what I was doing. But, you know, again, I think I did. I just didn't really give myself credit.
But what led you to keep doing it is like back to your original statements of, I was going to trust me. I was going to fall back on me because I knew what I'm capable of. And if I was going to fail, well, I was going to fail, but I was going to figure it out. I was going to learn from the fail because there's no way to go but up. You know, you fall, you got to get back up.
Yeah, totally. And I think having the learner mindset was really helpful to me. You know, I think people think they need to have everything figured out and be super confident in what they're doing before they do it. Yeah. Well,
I've been guilty of that.
Yeah, I've been there too. But I think what was helpful to me was knowing that it was okay that I didn't know everything, and most people don't know everything. And they just leap before they are ready. And I just kept doing that and consulted for a little while and found myself consulting for a tech company. They just kept re-extending my contract because we were doing awesome work together and building something that they were really excited about. And that thing turned into a team at this company that didn't exist before. And it was a combined learning and change team. And there was another moment there after years where they were like, hey, you helped us conceptualize this. You kind of helped put the plans in motion. Do you want to come work for us and lead this team that basically you created as a consultant? You helped us dream this up and make it happen. Like, do you want to just come
That's
be on
awesome.
this team?
That's badass.
Yeah. And I was like, I guess so. I don't know how to do that, but sure.
I'm just going to jump and jump into the net will appear.
Yeah, let's do it. And so jumped in, and like, it's never rainbows and butterflies. I jumped in, and actually that job wasn't real, right? I'd left my consulting job for this thing that ended up not really materializing for a while. Like, it eventually became real, but there was, I think, 6, 7 months where they were like, actually, we've got a lot to figure out before we can make this a real role for you. And I was like, oh my gosh, what have I done? And so there was a lot of stress, trust, learning, and eventually the job did become real. And eventually I did build a team, and I led that team and did that for a couple of years. And then there was a opportunity with a different company where I'm with currently, doing very similar work, but was really excited about my current company, what they were doing. And at this point, I actually do feel a little bit more confident in what I've done, the experiences I've had. I'm not going to say I don't still feel like I have that imposter syndrome, because I definitely do. But over time, you do start to trust yourself a little bit more, and you do start to believe that, oh yeah, no, I have done things and I have experience that people find interesting. But that took a long time. Like, I really had to work at that. So now I find myself looking back and I'm like, whoa, that was a real windy, zigzaggy path that no one could have predicted or planned.
Right.
You never would have planned this. And I still know there's so much more too, right? Like, the more that I'm leading teams and figuring out more about what makes me a good leader and what could make me a better leader, and all of that is energizing to help me think about, like, okay, like, what could that mean? What could be next?
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that, in my opinion, because we're always going to have new goals. You know, okay, we're out of teaching and we're in a job that makes me more happy and more fulfilled in life. And then there's like the next threshold. Now it's this and this and this. And I think that's perfectly normal. Thank you for being honest and saying, yeah, I'm doing a lot better, but of course I still have imposter syndrome here or there, because I think that's to be human. And for anyone that wants to do good and to do good work and to change lives, and I know change lives is a little dramatic. Not everyone wants to, find the cure for cancer, but in that sense, like, to do good, to put your worth out there in whatever it is that you do, we're still going to have imposter syndrome here or there. So thank you for sharing that. So let me ask you a question. So you are working for a very big tech company. You are in the change management, learning and development sector, doing all the things. And then hopefully this isn't too hard of a question, because I didn't send this to you. But if you could go back and give yourself, like, the Maddie that was teaching, realizing, oh my gosh, this is not what I want. I'm not being the best teacher for these students. They know that I am focused on other things or a little lost in direction. That self-doubt, that imposter syndrome, that what am I going to do? I'm just going to keep put one foot in front of the other. Here you are now, 6, 7 years later. Would you go back and tell that version of Maddie, that version of scared shitless, I'm not sure what to do, that self-doubt? What would you say?
Yeah, that's a great question. Honestly, like, my first thought is, like, I would just give her a hug and just let her know, I see you, and this is hard. Like, this is actually hard. What you're feeling is hard, and you're going to be okay. It's going to be okay. I think I would say that. But I would also probably say, this is going to continue to be hard. And you have to continue to trust in what's possible instead of, like, what is currently, because it's hard to put yourself out there and to take those steps when literally, I mean, again, I just have this visual of a tightrope. It'd be like a tightrope suspended in midair, but you're blindfolded and, like, you can't see the tightrope also, right? Like, it's there, and if you keep walking on it, you'll get there, but you can't see the platform and you can't see each step along the way. And if you fall, like, you don't know what happens then. So, I mean, I think I would tell her, keep putting one foot in front of the other, like, keep trusting yourself, keep trying, but also that you're not in it by yourself. Everywhere I went, there was always someone I found that was able to learn from, like, obviously had amazing family support, amazing friend support. And I felt like I had my people. But also, as I'm going into these unknown places where I don't know people, there's always people to be found that they're there to help. And I think being open to that, I can think of every single job. There was someone who became a mentor to me, or someone who, not even formally, but we would get together and just talking with them. There would just be like little nuggets that I would kind of pull from them. But just having that learner mindset and being open to not knowing and to learning and changing your mind about things. So I don't know, this is becoming a lengthy conversation at this point now with past Maddie, future Maddie. I see you. This is hard. You're going to be okay, but just trust that it will work out and keep pushing forward.
Yeah. And ultimately, I'm curious, did you ever have the thought during the negative, during the what am I doing? I am freaking out. I am in over my head. Even when you transition out of teaching, you're in your first job in corporate America. Did you ever have the thought, even despite all this negative that I'm feeling and this self doubt, this is going to make me happy? Like I have to keep trying to find that happiness, like walking towards what is going to ultimately leave me happy. So I'm just curious because, like, to me, sometimes in the darkness, and I don't know if you struggle with depression during this period of your life or anything like that, but in my experience, when I was struggling with serious depression, it was that little itty bitty voice, even if it was just like a match, or an ember that's smoking, that was like,
Yep.
but ultimately, this is what is going to drive you to happiness. Ultimately, we don't want to give up. We want to keep fighting because I know it's there. I know what I'm looking for is there. So I'm just curious because I'm sure that's conflicting too, because you're over here self-doubt, but then there's also like, but hey, we can do it because we need to be happy, right? So I'm just curious.
Yeah, there's always hope. I mean, I think even in the darkest parts of my life, which again, it's not like, oh, great, it was dark and now it's light. It's like, I think it's kind of a constant flicker of, oh, and now things feel light and hopeful and possible. And oh, the lights are off again. Oh no, now I feel dark and scared and I can't see what's possible. So it's kind of just this flickering. But I think it's believing that the lights can come on again. I think what you said, that little ember, just remembering that can be stoked, that can get bigger. And it's okay if it's not bigger. I mean, I think there's certainly been times in my life then and since then, and there's been highs and lows, but it's always still smoking. And sometimes you throw some wood on it and it's like, whoa, it's a roaring fire and things are great. And then sometimes the fire dies down and you're back to the little ember again. But yeah, just believing in the possibility of the fire. I think also knowing how to take care of yourself when it is the ember.
Yeah.
I don't know that I did or that I do a great job of that. Like, I think I need a lot of work on how do I care for myself in those darker moments. But yeah, urging people to reach out and ask for support, ask for help. I don't know any other way other than remembering that there's always possibility,
Right.
and that people are there for you.
And I think it's pretty brave to have the thought, to have the question, is this what I want? Because that's
Mhm.
scary. I mean, you were talking about all the education you had and training to be a teacher. You're faced with those questions of, did I just waste my time? Did I just do this? Da-da-da-da-da. Like, I can't even imagine all of that. So
Yeah.
ultimately, it comes down to trusting yourself, which shouldn't be as hard as it is, but it is. Because you have
Yeah.
society saying, no, you should be doing this or you should be doing that. And then your own versions of what you think society makes you think you should do. It's a mess. It's a mental mess, 1000%. So,
Yeah. No one takes any of it away from you. And I think that's the other piece is like, I still do love education. I still do love working with kids. I still do love teaching. I'm no longer part of it, but I found there was like this local nonprofit in Seattle that was looking for some people to sit on their board of directors to help them navigate their mission and working with students and whatever. And I was on the board for 2 years. I think that was like the stint, do it for 2 years. And it was interesting. It was like, wow, this is kind of like, again, my desire to be in this world and to like help students, it hasn't gone away, but there's other ways I can fulfill that. And maybe
right.
that's volunteering, maybe it's sitting on a board. I've done a lot of coaching and it doesn't have to be totally gone. No one can take away what was, right? So like no one can take away from me that experience I had as a teacher, those years in education. And I talk about it a lot. And I think it doesn't have to be like, just because it's not where I am anymore, doesn't mean that it wasn't important or that
Right.
it didn't matter. It's not, you're not
Absolutely.
throwing it away, right? Like you're adding to it. It's like
Right.
you're going on a road trip and you're like, hey, I'm just going to keep driving. I don't really know where I'm going to go. You keep passing through these different towns and you go and see some sights or you have dinner somewhere or whatever. You grab a magnet. No one can take any of that away, even if you're no longer in those spots, right? You
Right.
were there,
Right.
live life there. And now as you talk about your trip, you got to be like, oh yeah, I had dinner there. Or yeah, I have this cool magnet.
Oh,
Like, let's talk about it.
what a beautiful
So
metaphor. I'm getting goosebumps. I
hey,
love
there
that.
you go. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love that. And then ultimately, I mean, despite imposter syndrome here or there, we're faking it till we make it here or there, because we're going to face that probably till the end of time, right? Ultimately, are you happy now? Do you feel like whether the current role you're in, the current company, this is exactly where I need to be? Or is it, man, I'm so glad I fought through that self doubt. I'm so glad I kept putting one foot in front of the other because the fulfillment that I was looking or I was lacking, I'm finding
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, I mean, I still have my moments where I'm wondering. I think we all do. Like, yes, I am happy. I knew that what I was feeling when I was teaching was not only unsustainable, but unfair to my students. So, in that regard, yes, I'm feeling fulfilled. I'm feeling challenged. I'm feeling career-wise. I have made a career for myself that I'm proud of. But it doesn't mean I don't have my hard days and I don't have my hard moments and I'm not still wondering and questioning. Honestly, if anyone ever said, I've got it all figured out and I have no bad days, Like I would really want another secret or I would really wonder about them. Like I
Right.
really would have to scratch my head and go like, are you sure? But yeah, I mean, even just taking this time today with you to sort of walk through the journey and walk through those moments, you know, it's hard to talk about, but I'm proud that I pushed through it. Doesn't mean I have it all figured out. Doesn't mean it's all sunshine and rainbows right now. I'm proud that I did that. And I am in a spot where I feel more confident. I feel like I'm adding value daily.
That's important.
Yeah, at the same time, I didn't have to give away the fact that I still really care about education. I care about students. I love that. I have a lot of friends that are teachers. I think that's really important for people to hear that you don't have to throw that part of you away. It
Right.
just doesn't be your career, you know?
Right.
That I think is important to know.
I agree.
So,
And also like how you talked about the board, you don't know what opportunities will come to help exercise like that piece of you, even if that's not your bread and butter, your main 9 to 5, or for teaching, you're 24/7. Let's be real. So before we close things out, can we just talk a little bit in general for our fellow listeners who are wanting to transition out of teaching into corporate tech? I know the job environment right now is a little wompy. I guess I just made that word up, but it's a little all over the place. And I know that can be discouraging, but I still truly believe don't let that discourage you because you never know, like keeping one foot from the other, it will happen for you. And I loved your example of like building energy and momentum towards that. I think that is so beautiful. Love, love, love that. For those listening who are like, everything you just said, I feel that guilt, but also everyone's firing everybody. What do I do? Let's just get down to a very baseline level. What are transferable skills as a teacher into corporate America, into tech America? I mean, corporate tech, it's all the same to me, but transferable skills and then articulating those to corporate America. So whether that's industries, whether that's roles, because learning and development, I know is a very big department that most companies, especially big companies, are going to have. So could you go a little bit into that, like guidance, Maddie, the guidance advice person?
okay. Oh my gosh. Uh-oh. No, I mean, I think, yeah, like you said, this is a really challenging time. You know, we've seen this before. I'm not that old, but I have seen job market fluctuations, and I think we're in one, and the tables are turning, and we just have to acknowledge, yeah, it's not great out there to be a candidate, but that won't be forever. You know, we don't know how long it'll last, but the tables are going to turn. So I think the question is, okay, what are you doing right now in this moment to prepare you for when the tables are turning? Right? There are still companies hiring, 100% they are. There are a lot of companies that are reducing their workforces, but a lot of companies are taking advantage of that. They're like, great, we'll take your talent. Awesome. We need someone over here. So I would tell people, don't stop applying. Like there's always jobs that are out there. There just might not be as many, but that's okay. Transferable skills. So anyone who's coming from education, like you mentioned, learning and development, typically it's like sits within human resources of a company. Sometimes not, but typically it'll sit there. And then sometimes each part of the business will have its own learning and development function or its change management function. So there's a lot of opportunity in bigger companies, but
Yeah.
smaller companies, yeah, look for HR. But as far as skills, I mean, gosh, your ability to think critically as a teacher, you're definitely doing that. And that's a huge one. Problem solving. I mean, hello, like problem solving all day long in the classroom. You're just solving different problems, but you've honed your ability to think quickly, make decisions quickly, your ability to relate to all different types of people. So how I would translate that would be like, okay, in the classroom, I was able to talk to and relate with students, with fellow teachers and colleagues, with parents, with school board members, with my leadership, right? You had different, what I would call stakeholders, like that would be the corporate America word. I am able to relate to various stakeholders and translate their various needs into actionable plans, right? It's just changing the words, but
Right.
exactly what you're education you're going to do in corporate America, instead of students, parents, fellow teachers, principal, school board, you're going to have other people on your team, project management department, IT department, leadership team, HR. It's the same thing. So
Right.
I would highlight that project management skills, right? So that would be the corporate America word. As a teacher, creating not only lesson plans, but like semester plans or year-long plans. The whole year is a giant initiative or
Right. It's
project.
like a strategic plan.
Yeah, yeah. All these different parts and pieces that are going to go into making that strategy successful. You're doing that. Teachers are doing that every day, just different words ultimately. And this goes for people who are not teachers too. Now that I'm leading teams, I've done a lot of interviewing people and I've done a lot of hiring people. And honestly, it actually like doesn't matter to me as much what industry experience someone has. Yes, I mean, if you're going to go in and be an instructional designer or something, you know, now that I mentioned that, that is a good transferable spot for teachers, right? You're creating curriculum, you're creating courses, you're just not doing it for students, you're doing it for adults.
Yeah, you're doing it for like an organization. Yeah.
Yeah, and some of these things, yeah, it would be great if you knew the tools to use, or yes, some industry experience is preferred and needed. But what I look for mostly is those skills that are hard to train. Like you can teach anyone how to use a certain software program. Like you can always learn anything. What's harder to learn, in my opinion, is adaptability, flexibility,
Yep.
emotional intelligence,
Yep.
communication, relationship building. When I
Exactly.
look at people who are the easiest to work with, that are honestly the most successful, they may or may not be the most industry specifically talented, right? But they can always add that.
Mhm.
What they are masters of is how to communicate to people, how to bring people along, how to make people want to work with you, how to be able to like change on a dime. Those are the things that are really hard to teach.
Right.
So if you have those, which I think a lot of teachers do have those, and
I'd
then
agree.
lean into that and really talk about experiences where you've had to be really flexible and adaptable and you didn't let things drop. You just found a way to pivot and find the new normal, or talk about how you've worked with challenging people and how you did a good job managing that complexity. Those are the types of experiences I think people really want to hear about,
Yeah.
and the rest of it will come.
Absolutely. Thank you for saying all that. I think that's important. And even me, like transitioning to a more senior level role or anything like that, sometimes it's just knowing how to sell yourself, because you look at a job description, you're like, what in the heck? I don't know what any of this means. And I just want to put a disclaimer. There is business jargon out the wazoo out there. Half the time, at least in my experience, when I'll Google some things, I'm like, oh, that's just blah, blah, blah. That's just this, that's just that. So don't be intimidated from your initial onset of a job description. And another rule of thumb, and Maddie, you can back me up if you agree with this too. Obviously, I'm not saying if you're a teacher, you're going to transition to brain surgery, but talking about these transitions that we're talking about, getting learning development, change management, things like that, companies looking for their next employee, they don't necessarily expect you to hit all of those check marks. You know, that would be great, but that's a unicorn most of the time. And we're not all unicorns. I mean, we are in our own special ways, of course, but like a job description unicorn doesn't really exist. Like those things you just said, everyone teaching, and honestly, probably most people, like you have those skills. So it's thinking outside the box. Go look at job descriptions. Google a few of the terms. I do it myself because I'm like, how many versions of marketing are there? And then I Google all these terms. I'm like, oh, this is all the same thing. They're just using fancy words around it just to confuse me. I'm sure a lot of people listening have felt that. So it's taking that and honestly bulleting it. Okay, what does this mean really? Google it, make your own version of it. But then I guarantee you're going to find an equitable trait within yourself or skill set that defines that. Because I agree with you 100%, Maddie. Those skills that you can't teach, that is what will sell you in an interview, in a role. I can't think of any other career, like I'm sure if I really thought about it, I could, but off the top of my head, teaching, you are having to combat all that coming at you all the time and having to quickly think, having to pivot. Is this person having a mental breakdown? Is this person going through something? Oh my gosh, the county just put this requirement on us, but we have this test coming up and this kid's mom is wilding out, dealing with a lot of chaos, a lot of change. Yeah, that is something, that adaptability like you were talking about. Yeah, you can't really teach that. That is sink or swim. And so that is a huge thing, I think, going into a corporate job. So I agree. I would say exercise, go look at different job descriptions, especially like in this learning development realm that we're talking about, because there's so many roles within that, and start equating their business jargon, we'll just call it that for simplicity's sake, and comparing it to your experience. And chances are you're going to see that line up more than you think it is.
And don't be afraid. I think a real tactical recommendation. I mean, LinkedIn, obviously it was around, but it like wasn't as big of a thing.
Yeah, I feel like it's really kind of evolved since the pandemic, at least in my opinion.
Yeah. It's definitely, I think, the go-to. Sometimes you'll be able to find out who the recruiter for a certain job is. Like you can see that information sometimes. I think sometimes you might need like a premium subscription or something, which you can get, I think, for free for 30 days. So just like free plus.
Yes.
Get it for free, use it, cancel it. If you can find who the recruiter is and you're in this position where you're like, I'm transitioning, I really think I'd be great at this job, but if I just apply, it's going to go to a system that's going to reject me, right? I think seeing behind the scenes, a lot of jobs, like they don't even get to a human for a while, right? Like it's this automatic system that's sort of like looking at your resume, comparing it to the job description. And if it isn't worded perfectly, you're resume just never got seen. And that's really unfortunate. So I would
Yeah.
say as much as you can do to not only like optimize your resume, number one, for the job, but two, to try and find out like who is the person that I need to reach out to, and then have a conversation and do this translating for them of like, hi, I am making this transition from education into insert whatever industry here. Here's why I feel like I'd be a great fit. Here's my transferable skills. Here's what I noticed in your job description that I can rock. Here's why I would love to work at your company, why I'd be a great fit. And just like get to a human who can hear that and move you into a different pile. I think just tactically try that.
I think it's
It's
great.
possible. And again, the job market is hard, but as much as people can make connections and network and try and just tell their story, it will happen. Just don't stop believing that it's possible. Might not happen tomorrow, might not happen 6 months from now, but it will happen for sure.
And then when it does happen, you will be able to look back and see the path and see why it needed to happen that way to bring you there, at least in my opinion. And I was just going to say, even if looking back in the moment right then and there, you're like, I don't know, that was pretty crappy. I really wish that hadn't happened to me.
Yeah.
But think about us talking today and you getting to share your journey. And it's not all, like we said, rainbow and sunshine and butterflies, but you can talk to your experience of just the confusion of figuring it out. And now, well, at least now I am in a place where I'm confident and I feel good and this, and I can really see the tethers of what I loved about teaching and how it relates and plays out in my day to day now. Maybe that's the story. Maybe that's the experience. But either way, fight through the negative. Like you said, trust in yourself, believe in yourself, which is so much easier said than done. But trust that slowly but surely, one foot in front of the other, it will happen. And whether that's you meet some people that help open some doors, whether taking that walk, you ask yourself some questions that start giving you different inspiration. There is a myriad of things what can happen to guide you on that path. You just got to start. So start by checking in with yourself and just put a foot out there and just see where it goes.
Yeah, 100%. And you know what? People have this idea like, okay, my next step is this. Like, I want this job or this title or whatever. And that might actually be like 4 steps from now. It might need to be where you do a little side step and then you do another side step and then you get some more experience. And then you know what? There you are. And there's the title or there's the job. Or maybe through all of that sidestepping, you realize, actually, I don't even want that. I don't even like that. So yeah, I think there's so much possibility. I think everything you just said is really true and encouraging. And I hope whoever is listening can take that to heart.
I hope so too. And remember, for anybody, especially in the teaching world, transitioning out, the biggest gift is your ability to connect with people, individuals with completely different personalities. And that is just ultimately, I think, a huge thing. Because I don't know, the more we get into social media and digital and this, like, I don't want to say human traits, like people, our personal skills are going away, but in a sense they are, you know what I mean? And especially as we are in this like work remote and remote learning in a lot of places still, like, don't forget that how big of a deal it is just to be able to understand humans. And like you said, emotional intelligence and human behavior, that is so key because that is lost in a lot of things. And that skill will absolutely translate into corporate America. Man, this was a great conversation. I really enjoyed this. And I really appreciate you being so raw and authentic and not sugarcoating it. You know what I mean? Like, not that I'm surprised or anything like that, but it of course broke my heart, but like I appreciated the realness of, the negative feelings you still feel about, or the guilt, I should say, of leaving teaching and that disappointment and just the waves that it comes. And that's going to happen all the time. But I just appreciate that authenticity and sharing that because I think that it will be something that a lot of people can resonate with and feel. And also think it's good to call that out because maybe when you make the decision to transition or to do this, something different than what you've been doing, maybe you're not expecting to have, oh, why do I feel so negative or sad about this when this is ultimately what I want instead? It's like, wait, I thought I was doing the good thing. Now I feel like kind of a piece of crap still. Why? So I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was hard. It is sometimes still hard to think about, but ultimately something can be hard and right at the same time. And I think that's what makes life really interesting and beautiful is that we can like hold these multiple things at one time. Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it. And you made me feel safe to be honest and open. And
thank you.
yeah, it's something that's hard to talk about. And for any of your listeners who are preparing to make this transition or considering making the transition, I don't want to lie and set expectations that like, oh, it was just all easiness, because it wasn't, but it was also still beautiful, even still. So
Beautiful. Oh, I just had goosebumps from that. I love it. Well, Maddie, thank you so much for joining me on the in between and talking about such a major in between that we navigate in life. So thank you so much. And remember, for anyone listening, believe in yourself and believe that anything is possible. So, yeah, thank you so
thanks
much.
for having me. Yeah. Appreciate it.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Maddie, and we'll talk soon.